Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series, your resource for the latest news and updates on pressing issues facing the accounting profession.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series. I'm Eric Auskerson, one of your hosts for today. We've got a great program, so let's get right into it and review the agenda. We're going to kick things off with a profession key topic discussion with Barry Melanson. Then Lisa Simpson and I are going to give you the latest on the wind down of the business relief application programs and also talk a little bit about some tax activities. We then are going to have a discussion about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program with our incoming chair, Bill Paroli, and a Restaurant Association, Hospitality Association executive, Dale Venturi. And then we'll close with our open forum. A couple of housekeeping items. You can earn CPE by clicking on 75% of the pop-ups. Leverage that toolbar at the bottom to download the materials and ask questions. And if for some reason your browser freezes, do a refresh. So let's get right into it. First, this is the lineup, and I will be introducing them as they join today's program. So Barry Melanson, come join me as we just talk a little bit about the AICPA Town Hall Series. A question we've been receiving quite frequently is, the membership have been telling us how valuable the town hall is, and are we going to continue it? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're investing more in this town hall program. It's a very, very valuable opportunity for us to connect with the membership in this bi-weekly fashion, sometimes weekly. The questions that you ask us, the feedback that you give us really, really do help us in deciding what we should be focusing on. Also, it helps us with our discussions with policymakers in our ecosystem. So Barry, we call this the Power Hour. And I know this is something that you're very passionate about.
Very passionate. And I have to say, before I comment on the last point, we just have a tremendous team of people that have been doing a fabulous job of bringing this to the membership every other week, and frankly, continuing to make improvements. If you go back and look at one of the early ones, it's not much like it is today. They're continually improving. But I think the most important point is that we take very serious the role of the profession in this trusted advisor notion. And the world is not going to get simpler. The pace is not going to slow down. And we see this as sort of ability to take sort of in a funnel type of concept, all of these things that are happening and bringing them to the most important things, updates, sometimes a little bit of a drill down in a 1-hour format every other week, and help you, hopefully, whether you work in a company or whether you work in a firm, to somewhat see around the corner, to somewhat see what's coming down, and to think about some things in a way that maybe in a busy day, a busy work life, you may not be taking a step back and thinking about them. And so the feedback has been fantastic. We're going to continue to do them. I think the issues will continue to evolve. And frankly, I don't think there'll be a shortage of issues.
Absolutely not. And what we try to do is bring you the best available information, give you our interpretation, our real-time interpretation. Sometimes the news breaks during the day and we tell you what we understand about that breaking news, talk strategies, and talk about developing capabilities. So this is one slide that we show a lot. And even over the past week, it just continues. What we're going to share with you today is based on discussions with some of the government officials, with the firms, with technology providers, and the lenders. So this is how we gather the information. And just like you, we're watching what's going on in the news. And right now, Barry, it's all about more stimulus as well as the wind down of the relief programs. So let's first kind of talk a little bit about what's happening in DC. Here's a picture of our president signing a bill. The big question, Barry, is when's he going to maybe sign this infrastructure and tax proposal bill?
Yeah, I think it's really important in this town hall to take away the notion of just a slight bit of pause. You're going to have employers or clients asking you for what about this and what about that. A lot of noise in the system, a lot of reporting about what's going to be in it and what's not going to be in it. I can tell you almost every year when there's a State of the Union and a president talks about, tax issues or whatever, then immediately it's like, well, what's the answer to this? And very rarely do all of those things come about exactly how someone addresses them in a public forum. And so I think the real essence right here is to understand the timing and the politics. There are not a lot of answers right now. There are a lot of political battles to be fought within, for instance, the Democratic Party, and to maybe a lesser extent, but to some extent in a bipartisan way. There's media reports about how quickly this is going to move and all of these things. Here's the key component. If it moves in without a bipartisan solution, which right now looks like that probably will be the case, it has to move with a 51-50 rule, a vote, what's called reconciliation in the Senate. The current ruling on that, and it's evolved since even the last couple of town halls, is that will require first an appropriations bill for 2022 and then a reconciliation process. The reconciliation process allows the Senate to pass something with a majority vote. And so there's a couple of steps that have to take place. And then there's massive negotiation even within the Democratic Party on certain issues. There are people who in the Democratic Party saying, I'm not voting for this bill unless X is in. Well, we'll see. We'll see as that gets to sort of the time to actually vote and move things forward. But that slows down the process. I think the real answer to the question is it could always move quicker. But if you had to assume, it won't be in the summer, it won't be July 4th, as some people are talking about. It's going to extend into the fall. That's the most likely outcome. And so the message to your clients has got to be, there's a lot of turns in the road before we get to the end of the road. And those answers, we're going to keep you up to date in these town halls so that you can keep them up to date to how things move. And those answers, you as the CPA, you will help them through that process. But it's not available to do that now. And in fact, if you do it now, you could be making a false decision or a false bit of advice, because who knows how it's actually going to play out. So think about it in the context of the fall, probably not all the way to November or December, but more into the fall than into the summer.
And Barry, we could spend the next hour talking about this, but we got many other discussion points that we want to cover. We will have Mark Peterson and team, the advocacy team, talking about this in future town halls. And clearly, there's lots of elements in these bills that we're taking active roles around. So more to come. And then Barry, as we always say, it's Washington D.C. So you just said it could be fall, but we could be talking on July 4th, and who knows? Maybe there's some type of compromise, and we'll just follow it and unpack it when things change. So
the old saying, stuff happens. Well, stuff happens a lot in Washington. So
stuff happens a lot. So more to come on that. But when we looked at the feedback coming in from the last town hall, these are the kind of 4 big points, Barry. First, so we're gonna take the slide down in a second, but we're gonna talk a little bit about reflections on the tax season. We'll talk about the wind down of these relief programs. What we are seeing is 2 big elements this summer related to servicing some of these relief programs, and then we'll close out with an economic growth discussion. So Barry, why don't you just reflect a little bit? You've seen a lot of tax seasons. This, in some ways, the last 2 were unlike anyone you've seen before, though.
Yeah, and saying unlike anyone is true, because they sort of compelled themselves together and sort of felt like one continuous one. It was very difficult. We realized it was. We understand the stress. In some ways, I guess getting past May 17th, we're hearing a bit of, thank goodness for a little bit of a pause. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's important from a mental health perspective. Firms try to focus on that with their employees as well. So the profession once again performed, I think, under very trying times in a very marvelous way, and take that back as a profession as a whole and feel great about that. Obviously it extends to a large degree, a lot of open items and a lot of things that have been extended and sort of more work to be done. No question about that. Let's just be clear. 2 big issues, IRS service levels and penalty relief, are front and center in our Washington team's daily activities. IRS service, despite how it was framed in certain testimony and certain activities, it's still a major problem. and it's not going to be solved in a short period of time. Unlikely. There'll be improvements. They're good men and women with the right intention of trying to improve, no doubt about that. But it's a massive backlog, and it's a massive sort of catching up. And Congress is well aware. We're continuing to make that point. We have proposals about things that could help it along the way. There are some things being debated about additional funding, but none of them are going to happen overnight. The other is penalty relief. We know there are a lot of unintended consequences that happen with the moving parts that were going on. You add the disasters on the top, natural disasters on the top, et cetera. Interpretations. There's a lot of unintended consequences that, again, people with the right intent, well-meaning people, shouldn't be facing ridiculous penalty situations, and it shouldn't be impossible to get relief on those penalties through the system. And so we are clearly articulating that point over and over again. We have whole strategies related to how to improve the penalty relief situation. And I just think it's very important for all of you in the broad tax area to know that those two items are front and center in everything we're doing in tax right now. We got work groups working on the tax bill coming up too, but this is the now problem from that standpoint.
Well, Barry, that's a good summary. And just on that slide, there was a clickable link on penalty relief that takes you to a summary JA article. So a great resource for you to leverage. So just moving on to the wind down. It seems like it was never going to end. All these different business relief programs, PPP, RRF, maybe Shuttered Venue Grant will continue on for a little while longer. But it does look like the SBA putting out announcements on both PPP and RRF winding down. People, we won't have to be working, Barry, over Memorial Day weekend on some of these applications. But when you look at these programs, I mean, we're going to talk about the economic growth. They've made a huge impact. The profession's played a very important role. And what we're seeing now is you're going to see more and more of these, post-relief critiques. Huge programs. I mean, there was 11 million PPP loans. It's kind of like when you have the annual tax returns. There's massive volume, and we know all the checks that just went out from the IRS. Sometimes the checks went to somebody that wasn't alive, and that's what happens in a massive program like this. And what we're beginning to see is in the third-party reviews and investigations, people calling things out, and we're going to see more and more of that. And one thing that will highlight is the important role of the trust and what the profession delivers and how important that is. But we also think it's important and you and I have discussed this, to keep the broader perspective in mind. So your comments. I mean,
look, as you said, it's a massive program. Let's not lose sight of the fact that it's certainly the original first phase of PPP set up very quickly to keep businesses in a survival mode, keeping employment, keeping the economy moving. We're going to talk about the economy in a little bit later. They actually did what they were supposed to do. Yes, people do bad things. Right. People take advantage of bad things. We know that in every walk of life. The good news is, I think when you talk about the role of the profession, a lot of the things where people, attempted to, or actually maybe succeeded in certain fraudulent activities, is with creating fake identities or fake entities and things of that nature. And the beauty of where the profession was involved, you brought to the table relationships with your client for the most part, people you knew, people who trusted you and you had a working relationship with, and your client retention of wanting to do business with people who are on the up and up and legit, and the ethics that we bring to the table. So I think we will see it, and there will be news there, but I also think there will be news about how the profession's involvement minimize those types of things where the profession was touching those businesses. And it'll take a while for that story to unfold. But when you're reading some of those headlines, don't forget that particular point.
I think it's an excellent point, because I've heard this from many of the providers. They've realized, remember back in April of 2020, where maybe the firms weren't working with all the lenders, due to some of the agent fee issues. I think when you look back on this program, just for the points that you outlined, for the next iteration of some of these, the lenders and some members of this ecosystem, even some of the government officials, are going to say, we need more involvement. from the firms to help stop these bad actors. And there's always going to be bad actors, and that's why there's the big assurance line.
That's right. And remember, when we started this process, we talked about 6 million small businesses with 500 or fewer employees. And if you go back to some of the things I said at that point, the most common thing they have, those 6 million businesses, is a relationship with CPAs. Not all of them do, but the most common out of those 6 million is a relationship with CPAs. And that relationship drives down the incident of problems in that process. And so that is clearly, I think, going to be a really important learning from this process about how small business and the relationship with the trusted professional that our profession really is made a difference. And I think, our profession did a great job. People make errors, but if you're going to look at where the CPA has been involved, the incident of error and the incident of fraud is going to be less.
I agree. So let's just talk about in these relief programs, just because the origination of some of the funding is ending, but you're going to have compliance, basic compliance work. You're going to have the forgiveness. There's 11 million loans, 3 million. We're going to talk about this with Lisa. 3 million have been forgiven, 8 million to go. And then you've got this ERC. So one thing, Barry, that we've been talking to some firms about is, putting together strategies now. Catch your breath and say, okay, how are you going to approach forgiveness? How are you going to identify or talk to the clients that you're going to support them for forgiveness? And then maybe some clients want to do it on their own, and make sure you've got strategies related to that. Same thing with ERC.
That's right. On the forgiveness, you can probably put clients into buckets. Those that, for some reason, either in the mental state or whatever, forgiveness right away is an important part to them. You got some that, on a size perspective, you're going to have a simpler process. You're going to have some that are maybe more sophisticated. The forgiveness immediately, they have confidence in the system. Forgiveness immediately is not a critical element to them, or it's not going to, something on their balance sheet is still there, isn't going to mess up a loan covenant. So I think you can do a triage and then sort of go about the forgiveness process in a more rational way. ERC, I think there's a lot of money here, and there is a lot of complexity, and there's a mending of returns. And I really think it's a prime example where a firm can step back and think about their strategies, where clients have an opportunity, frankly, their billing strategies. We talk a lot about a changing world on how you go about working with a client. This is one where value billing probably can be viewed, because it's high. There's a lack of answers, and there's high complexity, and it's probably worth a lot to that particular client. And so you're fitting that into your workload, sort of points directly to the value billing notion. And I think it's important to think strategically about that, and therefore also the timing. If it's not going to be value billed, if it's going to be traditional time and billing, where does that timing slot in based on the capacity of the firm?
And what we're going to be doing is, I think in our first town hall in June, on June 3rd, is we're going to talk about forgiveness strategies. We're going to talk about how to approach your clients, engagement letters. We'll talk a little bit about that today. Same thing on ERC. We're going to talk about capabilities, and we're going to talk about how you potentially, you got to think about your network and maybe do some referrals if you don't want to get into ERC. So more on both of those. But Barry,
and one last point on that, I think, be careful on contingent fees here. This ERC probably does not meet the technical definitions of where contingent fees can be in the profession. There's no indication of a third-party review, which is one of the criteria. And that's why I mentioned thinking about your billing strategies with different methodologies. It probably is not a contingent fee situation.
Right. And we'll talk about the value billing component and just being intentional with your strategies on the June 3rd town hall. So Barry, we about a month ago, we talked about, where the first quarter was standing. We had that economic strategist on our town hall on the last town hall. So on the slide, we talked about workforce challenges, supply chain issues, and evolving business models. I know when you're talking to firms, you ask what the top 3 issues are, and they say people, people, people. We're going to hear that from the hospitality executive as well. So just some closing comments here on just, and then I'll show a slide about kind of the world economic forecast.
Well, so first off, let's step back. One of the things was that we said that we are a consuming economy. As a consumption economy, government programs needed to help small businesses keep employment so that consumption energy engine could continue. That's happened. And as a result, our economic situation is probably a lot greater than anyone would have predicted. And frankly, we also said back then that consumption sort of philosophy of the United States also fuels the world economies to a large degree. And those things are happening. Places in the world differ somewhat. But the economies of the world are doing better for the most part than anticipated. Now, workforce is an issue. You know this. It's not just inside the profession. It is universal. There are a lot of reasons for it, but it is universal. And I think when on the slide we had, as Eric said, workforce, supply chain, and business models. I think those three areas are not areas that are necessarily the sweet spot that firms gravitate to in being a trusted advisor to their clients. But I think those three areas, I would encourage you to build some capacity in those areas, because I think this is where small business entrepreneurs, mid-sized entrepreneurs really need to help. And business models, where value is created, what changes you can make to business models is not an overly simple thing. We have a lot of guidance on that on our management accounting side as an example. And I think there's a value proposition as you move out of tax season into the next phase of work with your clients, that those three areas are going to be very critical. How to manage workforce, how to think about it differently, how to afford it differently, because that's going to be a critical element, how to change business models, and supply chains, which again is probably not a sweet spot. The risk in those supply chains, the management advisory that can take place, which affects what a business model looks like, are all going to be discussions that you can probably have with your client at a different level that can really make a difference of how successful they're going to be as we move to the next phase of the economy.
Great. So if we can, let's bring the slides up. There we go. So this is a pretty powerful slide prepared by the IMF. And Barry was just commenting on it. You look at this. You look at the U.S. The U.S. is leading the way. You've got the emerging developing Asia markets, which is China, also doing very well. But this is going to be an incredible year. So Barry, we'll be talking more about this. Lots of business model changes that the world's changed. The how businesses operate has changed, and then we're going to have this massive growth. So it's going to be a powerful year.
And I think those bars up there, particularly in the U.S., the government programs, and we're going to worry about deficit spending ultimately, et cetera. But the keeping small business running for the most part has driven that, as I just said. And I think we ought to all remember how fortunate we are to live in a country in which the world currency is the U.S. dollar, because that gives us the capacity to do some of the things that have been done that other countries do not have that same liberty with. And so it's important to think about those macro aspects.
Well, Barry, thank you. And we got a lot of comments, people saying they're happy. We're going to be continuing. I don't know why they thought we were not going to continue these town halls, but we're continuing them. There's going to be a dedicated, web area for people to access more information. So, and Barry is going to be here monthly, if not more frequently. So Barry will bring you back during open forum. We'll bring Lisa up now to cover some of these latest developments. So welcome, Lisa.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
So first off, this week, the SBA, on the last town hall, we said the general funding for PPP had been exhausted. What you're seeing here on this slide is an announcement that came out on 2 days ago, May 18th, that stated that actually they found some more funding. So they are processing applications that came in on that last day. They had a bunch of applications that came in on May 5th. They found some funding. They are now approving those applications. The general lenders cannot submit new ones. We'll review that on the next slide real quickly. And the SBA is still working with the lenders to resolve hold code error codes, do error code resolution. And there is that CFI opportunity. So Lisa, you and I talk about this as these three basic scenarios that applications fall into. An application that could not get successfully submitted to the SBA by one of these general lenders, the national banks or many of the fintech providers out there. The only option for that category is to work with one of these CFIs. We've got some CFI links here. As of last week, there was 600 CFIs that were in the PPP program. Some of them are winding down, but there still are CFIs that are open. The second category is you've got a PPP application that's under review. As I just said, the SBA has found some funding, and they are still processing the ones that are under review or on hold. So you can work with your existing lender. And then the final category is you got an E-Tran, but it has been funded. So Lisa, anything you would like to add on related to these scenarios?
It just adds to the complexity of communicating with your clients and setting the expectations that we've been talking about for the last few months. So there is an unknown, and I think just having an honest conversation with the client about where they are in one of these three steps and what the possible outcomes are going to be is really important to keeping the dialogue going and making sure that the client is fully aware of what could and could not happen.
Well said. So here's we covered this before. Here's the background. CFI is a category. It actually includes these four different types of specialized lenders. There's credit unions, there's CDFIs. Hit those links and you can find out more information. It looks like there's a good chance that some of these CFIs will be open until the end of May, but that always can change. So now, Lisa, we talked a little bit about forgiveness. So as we said, we got $3 million. This phase of PPP. With next town hall, we'll make a macro one that shows the 2020 and 2021, because when you add 2021, you actually have 11 million loans, not just the 5 million shown here.
And there's a lot of interest in, where is forgiveness going? Is it going to be simplified? We think that could take a while if it happens. So Barry talked earlier about kind of triaging your PPP borrower clients to see, are they eager to get filed? Do they have a business combination that they're trying to execute on, or are they just uncomfortable having that on their books? Or if they were one of the earliest PPP borrowers, they might be reaching that 10 months after the end of a long 24-week covered period. So for those, you may want to go ahead and start thinking about forgiveness. We talked with lenders today, and there's no big uptick, which you'll actually see on the next slide. There's no magic movement in PPP forgiveness. So you'll see that it's dramatically dipped. And that's simply because, as we've talked about, the SBA is focused on getting those final funding processes done. So again, once the program closes and that final bit of money is out the door, and actually I think we'll expect to see them pivoting to forgiveness very soon, not waiting until the end of June. But questions around $2 million and above. We talked with a banker today who's had one outstanding at the SBA for over 180 days. And the client's getting upset. They want to know what's going on and why isn't that being moved. So it's just stuck at the SBA waiting for them to prioritize the pivot over to forgiveness. But what can you be doing? Take a deep breath. You just finished a 14, 15, 16-month tax season. You finished all of your PPP loan applications. You got your restaurants in. Take a breath. And then step back and think about your firm's strategy for approaching forgiveness. How are you going to price these? When are you going to do them? As Eric mentioned, when are you going to slot those in? And what level of support do your clients want? Do they want you to complete the forgiveness application, or not online and not filing with the lenders, but working through the forgiveness application with them in total? Do they want to do it and let you review it? Or are they just completely hands off and they'll come to you when it gets denied? So you've got some resources here that can help you as you're stepping back to think about your approach to servicing your clients on forgiveness. So we have a services matrix that you saw back in the summer of last year. It talks about independence. It gives you links to the sample engagement letter that you see on the slide as well. We'll be updating the agreed upon procedures if you've got clients who want you to be deeply engaged in that forgiveness application process with them. So we've been kind of waiting like everyone else. Is forgiveness going to move or not? So we're just going to go ahead and get those processes updated to use as sample engagement procedures in an AUP.
And Lisa, just on this here, I mean, I think the lenders, I can tell you this, Lisa and I do meet with the lenders regularly. They want to get these forgiveness applications done. We're going to be talking to the lenders. I think there's probably going to be more collaboration with the lenders, trying to get, the same, goals we had, a year or so ago, common approach, really try to drive common understanding, work with the SBA. More to come on this. I think Lisa's three categories make a lot of sense. You're going to do it all. You're going to, review it, or the client's going to do it on their own. And we'll talk more about firm strategies, pricing strategies in an upcoming town hall.
And we'll actually be, doing a refresher on PPP forgiveness throughout the course of the upcoming town halls as well, because it's been a while. So we'll go back through that. Quick hit on the other business relief options, and the reminder to be talking to your clients about them. And then as we dig on into one of the few remaining programs other than ERC, on the next slide, we've got a reminder about the details of the Shuttered Venue Grant Program. So that one is still accepting applications, but as you remember from our previous discussions, it's got a fairly limited scope of businesses that are eligible for it. So that's why it's still got some money available. So if we move on into what's next, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund in the hospitality industry. So
yeah, so let's bring up our incoming chair. It's May. He will be chair after this upcoming council meeting. So welcome, Bill Paroli.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Lisa.
And Dale Venturini, who you saw in the opening slide. She's the president and CEO of the Rhode Island Hospitality Association. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you.
So let's set this up. Wow. We all know what the restaurant industry has gone through over the past year. Probably, they've been as hard hit as anybody. And you look at these stats from the National Restaurant Association, a $240 billion revenue shortage in 2020. You look at the jobs impacted. You look at how many restaurants temporarily or permanently closed. So Dale, you've been living this. Give us some, color and context.
I'm looking forward to the day the nightmare ends, by the way. But the context, the one piece of good news that just came out today is that 110,000 has now been reduced to 90,000 based on some of the economic relief that you have talked about this last 30 minutes. So that is very encouraging. So the difference there has made people, I said there was a collective sigh of relief, particularly in the state of Rhode Island, when tomorrow we are going back to 100%. I don't think anybody would disagree that the economic impact of COVID was staggering for everyone, but particularly our industry. And we have our own ecosystem. You talked earlier about supply chain. We have so many people that are affected by our industry, from weddings, events, meetings, conferences, even the hotel industry, which I also represent. So we weren't the only ones that suffered for that, because now what has happened, if there can be one positive thing out of this, is the cities and towns and the state are recognizing how important our industry was or is. And they're realizing that the tax revenue is down, the payroll revenue is down. We are a very labor intensive industry. It takes more money for us to make a dollar than most other industries based on how much staff we have to use. So as looking at the light at the end of the tunnel here, understanding that it's going to take a little while, that I don't think we've seen all of the fallout. I'm very concerned about where the RRF is going right now. It's like, what happens? How many people are not going to get that money? I'm getting those calls fast and furious already. But the biggest issue is how rapidly things have changed. I know Bill will talk about, I work in an industry that sometimes is living week to week, month to month. And the mantra that we had was change, adapt, and repeat. You never knew where you were. Our governor at the time was having daily press conferences, and you never knew. And so there was no time to plan. There was no time to understand what was happening. It was like being on the seat of, the edge of the seat every day. And so I think now that things are opening up, I'm hoping with all of this stimulus money, and also the fact that the National Restaurant Association is doing a petition right now on getting more money into that fund. Because originally we had asked for 120 billion, and what came out of it was certainly less than that. So I feel some optimism right now, but I have to say this, I learned a lot about things that I didn't know I needed to know, and one of them is a little bit about your industry. I found that the people that did not have professional services needed it so desperately. We have our weekly town halls, and the questions, bringing in our SBA rep every week, the questions, it was unbelievable the amount of help that people needed. They needed concierge service. I'm going to use my term, in the hospitality industry. They needed a concierge, and not having, if they didn't have a CPA, I was calling a lot of the CPAs here in Rhode Island for help. And I know the CPA Society helped out on that as well here in Rhode Island. But I do see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, Dale, that was a great opening. I'm actually going to even just bring Bill in for a quick comment here, because Bill, you've been on a bunch of these town halls, and we've talked about how 2020 was a defining year. You just heard why it was such a defining year. When you think about the firms and the role they played, and the different view that this restaurant industry now has of firms, just comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I've represented the restaurant and hospitality industry my entire career. And one thing I do understand about them is that they are incredibly resilient, amazingly resilient. I think about all of the outdoor venues that we have during the summertime here in our state and in Newport. And, we have summers where it rains every weekend. And yet they come back and they're back next year and they're doing it all over again. That's number one. And number two is they just love to feed people. I had dinner at a restaurant, and the owner came over and he said, I don't know why I'm going through all of this. It's costing me a fortune. I'm not making any money at all on every plate I put down. And I looked at him and I said, it's because you love to feed people. That's their purpose. So they will be back. They're tremendously resilient. And I think I've said this before, Eric, if you look at our long-term strategy report, what we call Horizons 2025, excuse me, our core competency was making sense of a complex and changing world. Well, I think we pretty much nailed that this year. We have had to adapt and move and change. And as Dale said, every day the situation was changing. So we talk with our clients, and we'd be more like therapists than accountants. And as Lisa said, take a breath. When PPP first came out, we just told everyone, take the money, put it in an account, spend it in the spirit of the law, and we'll talk to you when it's over. And that's really where we are right now with some of these other, I think we have more clarity now than we had, going back obviously to day one. As Barry said, it just came out, the floodgates just released. So I think our profession has been at the forefront, helping our clients make sense of all this. And when Lisa talked about forgiveness, where we're engaging in forgiveness is pretty much where we engaged in when they did the loan application. So some of our clients were very self-supporting. They were able to do it themselves. And those same clients are doing forgiveness themselves. And then we have the other extreme where we were intimately involved in the application process, gathering of the information, and will be intimately involved in the forgiveness process. So that's where we are right now. And, my heart goes out to the restaurant industry. I grew up in the restaurant industry. My family owned a huge restaurant, so I know what they're going through right now.
Well, Bill, what we'll do here is Lisa and I are going to quickly hit 2 slides, and then we're going to have just a group discussion. We'll get into a little bit more on how RFF has gone, because I think it's important for us all to understand that. This is how much money PPP delivered to the hospitality industry. So this is in the first phase 2020, and then the second phase 2021. So over 80 billion in PPP funding. But obviously, based on the last slide of the 240 billion plus shortfall, that wasn't enough. And this was the number one category for PPP funding, and that makes sense. Over 800,000 loans. So now they rolled out RRF, and no surprise here that it was oversubscribed. So Lisa, I know you're going to cover a couple of slides here quickly.
Yeah, so we've got a Journal of Accountancy article that gives you a great update on what's going on with RRF, but basically, as you've heard, it was oversubscribed. So we've gotten 303,000 applications in, asking for a total of $70 billion when only 28.6 was allocated to the program. So they're starting to distribute the money, but there is just not enough in the fund to cover the demand. There's still a small pocket of applicants who still have some funding available. Those are the smallest of the small restaurants who have $50,000 or less in revenues and are looking to apply to the grants. There's still money in a set aside for them. But the big news is that the SBA will stop accepting applications on Monday, May 24th. So if you are one of those very small restaurants, or if you have a client in that position, make sure you go ahead and get that application in. We've put together some resources that might be helpful for you or for your clients. We worked with the National Restaurant Association to develop an expense tracker tool that, again, is designed for the restaurant owner who's working 18 hours a day and doesn't have a lot of time to put into tracking how this money is used. That's a critical component of complying with the terms of the grant. You have to show at the end of the grant how the funds were spent. So we created an Excel spreadsheet that has some cool GWIS technology in it, thanks to the great team that I've got, and that's available for you to share with your clients. We also have a report on CPA involvement with clients, whether it's SVOG, RRF, PPP. It relates to all of the business relief options. EIDL gives you some things to think about in terms of your comfort or your engagement letters, independence, and what some of the things that you need to be on the lookout are. We are continuing to update our Understanding the RRF program. We have a similar document for SVOG. So as single audit clarity comes out, we'll be updating those resources. And then you've got a link to a deep town hall on our restaurant fund if you're interested in that.
Thanks, Lisa. So now we're going to just have a discussion with these three topics that we pulled it all fast. So the first one is we're just going to talk about how RRF went, because I know you talk to firms and every firm's got their experience. We're going to give you the macro experience of how RRF went, and then we're going to talk about some key issues, staffing challenges, and then the evolution of the business model with the restaurant market and the roles firms can play. But kicking it off, Dale, how did it go? I mean, how did it go? It's only been live 2 weeks and it's out of money, and so you were on the front lines.
I don't know if this living in chaos is sustainable, but it seems like it's never-ending chaos. I feel that with the RRF, people knew that there wasn't a lot of money, and we did so many town halls, 3 and 4 a week, to get people to understand, not wait the 21 days to apply right away, because we knew those people were going to be in the queue first. And I think I'm not the only one around the country that did that. So as a result, I can see why we're oversubscribed. We are oversubscribed. And as I said earlier, the National Restaurant Association is working on the petition around the country to encourage Congress to increase that fund, because we are not out of the hole yet. We are in a place right now where, as we're crawling out, the economy is booming. We're hoping for great weather. But it'll just take one other thing to take someone down. I can't define what that is, because it's going to be dependent on each individual restaurant. Also on the hotel end, we got the Save Our Jobs Act coming out right now, because that part of our industry was pretty much ignored, because technically they weren't closed down. They were left open to help and house, first responders and the like. So How do I think it went? I feel like we're still in the wind tunnel, quite frankly. I think that it's going to take another couple of weeks till it settles. What I'm more nervous about is when the people find out they did not get funding. That is what I'm really concerned about, and working with my board of directors to talk about what that means, because remember, every state has gotten a substantial amount of money coming from the feds. And we're already talking to our governor about where can that money be used, particularly for those people that did not get this money. And that is one of our major focus.
Well, that's well said. I mean, there may have been 1 million businesses that didn't get PPP that wanted it. That will come out over the coming weeks and months, and we know there's at least 100,000 plus 200,000 restaurants that applied that didn't get RRF, and then there's many that probably just because this first 21 days they were going to be applying later, and then they got left out. So, Bill, when you look at who got in, and how are you having these discussions? There's a lot of we've talked about this before. There's a lot of pressure in the system right now. There's going to be a lot of frustration out there.
Yeah, I agree with Dale. I'm really worried about when the news comes back, sweating out the couple that we have in the system right now that we see are advancing, and one is under review, whatever that means. But in one particular case we could not apply for PPP2 because you couldn't have both applications open at the same time. So we had to apply for PPP2, then we waited. That ran out of money. We pulled that back, and then we got in within the 21 days. So there were a lot of spinning plates going on. And of course, tax season just ended on May 17th. So it was a battle of choices. And I spoke with my client today, and he asked why his returns are all on extension. And quite frankly, because I was trying to get you $1 million RRF loan, and that was way more important than getting your tax return filed. So there'll be opportunities that were missed, and now we're going to roll right into ERC, and the interaction of that with PPP forgiveness. It's going to be very complicated.
Be a long. I mean, well, as Lisa said, we got to take Memorial Day weekend off. There'll be a long summer. Yeah. Dale, back to you. And then we're gonna bring Barry in. We'll go to open forum. But just on the staffing challenges, and Barry will probably comment more about this. But we got staffing challenges with the firms and with finance departments. How are the staffing challenges with the restaurant market?
Well, challenging, needless to say. I quite frankly have labeled it the second pandemic. We've now got everybody. We're opening 100% tomorrow here in the state of Rhode Island, and many other states as well in the next week or so. And we cannot open because we cannot staff. I can't tell you the number of times people call me, because I tend to be their personal reservation system sometimes, that know me. They'll call me to say I can't get into a place, and it's reservation only, and or why are there empty tables and you can't seat me? And I really feel that unless we figure this out, and I will say there's no one size fits all. There's so many reasons. Childcare, daycare were closed. We were homeschooling children. There was no ability for whoever the caregiver was for the children to go back to work if they're in an industry like ours that needs you there. We can't Zoom you. Transportation issues. There are still people that are still afraid. We're doing some on-site vaccine clinics because of getting the vaccine clinic right on site, so people can't use the excuse they can't get there. So all of this coupled with the proverbial elephant in the room, so to speak, is unemployment from the feds. And you package that together to the actual perfect storm, and it becomes a major issue. I see, some states are giving bonuses, giving $1,500 bonuses from their Department of Labor. Others are doing a variety of things. What we did here in Rhode Island is we worked really hard with the Department of Labor, and we came up with some piece of legislation that I'm working tomorrow with the governor to sign. And I'm very excited about it, but most people don't like it because it's incentivizing people to come back to work that may not have wanted to come back to work. Instead of 100% of your weekly benefit, you can earn up to 150% of your weekly benefit, and still be able to earn some money and still get your $300. the antithesis of everything I've learned and what the ethics of who I am growing up. However, we are in desperate times. This legislation is temporary, thankfully. And it also starting on the 23rd, we have a search to work mandate coming back. That was a big, big mistake of not mandating people to prove that they were searching for work. And that is coming back in our state, and I've seen it come back in other states. It's a problem. It's more than a problem. I believe it is a crisis.
Well, on that one, I'm going to bring Barry Maloneson back up to talk about the crisis. So let's, Barry, with this, just great. That was a great discussion. But the Wall Street Journal front page article today, 22 states have done are doing something about the unemployment insurance. They're winding it down. They're putting other programs in place. So your reflections on that and just this overall workforce issue that's in many different industries for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there are some societal issues here that are beyond anyone's control, and people's attitude. What is their attitude towards work and the role of government? Those are policy or philosophical points that clearly are playing out in society at large today. But as it relates to the policy decisions, I think it just points to, the participation in the process with elected officials. Now we point to grassroots on specific issues related to our profession-wide issues, tax due dates and different elements of tax laws and things of that nature. We do that all the time. But what you have here is a series of policy issues about funding. And frankly, many people who are setting these policy issues have not run businesses. And it's very important for that small business voice. The notion is all politics is local. It's very important for these types of discussions to take place with the local members of Congress, the elected officials in those districts, and to point out the real world conflicts, unintended consequences, however you want to phrase them. It goes to the same thing with the restaurant fund running out of money. There's a difference between ERC, which is just a tax credit that is actually going to come through the normal budgeting process of how much tax revenue is available, versus a program that is funded to X amount of money. It's like saying we're going to spend X amount of money to build a bridge or pave so many miles of road. That's what those programs are. But if you compare the restaurant fund versus the ERC as an example, one's got limits and one doesn't. Those are policy decisions that come into a political element. And right now, our political process is polarized. It doesn't matter where you are on that political spectrum. It is polarized. Mm-hmm. And helping people to understand where they really need to be thinking about compromise and have a better understanding of the real world is also part of that political system.
Well, Barry, a lot of good points there. I just want to tell the listening audience here, we told Treasury and SBA and in all of our meetings that you should not roll out relief programs that are not fully funded. And I actually think when you fully understand what happened, at times Treasury recommended that they should be fully funded, and then the policymakers expanded the program, and then it turned out that they weren't fully funded. But it really was not helpful, RRF or even the PPP programs, to create this run and this anxiety. We're going to go lightning round here. We got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to throw a question to you, Bill. I mean, I'm not trying, no stumping here, yeah. But on this here, this is a lot of lenders are pressurizing their businesses to do the forgiveness process now. And this, I'll give you, since we're close to this, that the lenders want to get them forgiven, but the clients do not need to. It's their decision when they do forgiveness. How would you advise a client that was being pressured by a bank when you know that they can do it in their course of their own decision making process, not have it dictated by the lender?
Sure. There's a deadline, right? And that deadline, what that deadline is. Until we're advising our clients, don't apply for forgiveness until we've considered all of the options that are available or all of the complexities that could come up. Are we using wages to offset PPP that we could possibly get an ERC credit with?
Right.
Well, then everybody defaulted to wages because it became easy on the 24 weeks. But in a lot of cases, that may not be the answer. You may want to use those overhead expenses as opposed to wages, because those wages might be more valuable somewhere else. So we're advising them to, calculate it, see what it looks like, but let's continue to let this play out. I like Lisa's line, take a breath, let it play out, and for as long as you need to, so that we all clearly understand what the ramification is of the forgiveness that you're putting through.
Right. So Lisa, it's the business's decision when they apply for forgiveness. It's not the lender's decision. And then Lisa, on just if you want to expand on that, and also there's questions coming in related to a PPP audit process. What's the latest on that?
Well, I'm going to step back and make a comment that we've said a few times on town hall. Bill's point about ERC and PPP interplay is so spot on. You can amend a payroll tax filing. You've got time to do that. You are going to have a really, really hard time if you mess up your PPP forgiveness application. The process of appealing that, and just because you made a mistake, that's not going to be easy. So work to get the ERC PPP interplay maximized to your benefit. In terms of auditing PPP forgiveness applications, we haven't heard a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I can tell you that on our calls with lenders, they are still getting requests from the SBA for auditing the heck out of a $28,000 PPP loan. So there's still a lot of fine tuning that needs to happen with that SBA forgiveness process.
All right, so we only got a couple minutes here, and Barry, that's the thing you've always said, keep good records, because these third-party reviews could come. I'm going to do a quick question. Do you need to be an underserved community to apply with a CFI? Not necessarily. There's some CFIs that have some certain rules. There's some CFIs that only take applications from a certain state, but you can find a CFI. Barry, a quick comment on firms are having issues finding people. Comments, suggestions?
Well, I think the virtual world, or the work from home world, works in your favor. I think you can have employees wherever, so you have to sort of broaden your horizons of where you look. Clearly, there is it's a shortage of people in a lot of different industries. Enrollments at universities are somewhat coming back. We'll have to see how that actually plays out, but they obviously were down in the last year pretty dramatically to more than 500,000 less people in school, colleges and universities. This is going to have some long run ramifications. I think you got a younger generation of hiring that's going to look at flexibility and purpose, and I think you have to really recruit on those bases. And
recruit from different locations. You can recruit from a college university that you haven't normally gone to.
Right. It can be from anywhere.
So on that note, I want to thank Dale. We've received a lot of great comments here. Thanks for your partnership, and we're all with you on the hospitality market. It's important, as Bill said. They make people happy. They're not just feed people; they make people happy. So thanks, Dale. Hey, Bill. Thank you. Very excited about you becoming the AICPA chair in a week or so, and look forward to having you back on. And Barry, Lisa, it's always great to have you here hitting so many of these critical issues. So Lisa and I are now. So thanks all, and Lisa and I will just kind of cover some closing slides here. So bringing this back up as we always do, just talk about our resources. These archives, you can send them to members of your firm, members of your company. They're on they're on AICPA TV. We're getting thousands of views on them, so leverage those recordings. Just to continue, Lisa, will be more updates on the forgiveness area here of this section in coming weeks.
Yep, absolutely. My mind is working on some ways to try to explain this in a simpler fashion. So we're working on it. This is my plug for the PCPS Top Issues Survey. It takes about 10 minutes. and it's your opportunity to tell the AICPA in our firm practice management section what your biggest challenges are, so that we can then look at our resources, identify gaps, and point you to resources that will help. Just a plug for don't forget to check the summary document for some of the most common questions. And then we've got the slide on the cross-program eligibility, just to, you've always got the link there so that you can keep that top of mind. And then we've got some great learning opportunities. Tomorrow we've got a broadcast of all about PPP. Then we've got another rebroadcast of our employee retention credit session that we just had yesterday. That is a summary of PPP or ERC in 20 and 21, along with some of the practical applications of how to do this interplay that we've been talking about. And then a great tax practice session coming up as well.
And, you see that this is a, somewhat updated graphics here. Continue to stay in the conversation on the AICPA Town Hall. We appreciate all the social media activity related to what we're doing. And then finally, our next one will be on June 3rd. We're going to put together a lot of information on forgiveness on the ERC. We're continuing these town halls. This is a very, very important element of what the AICPA is doing going forward. So thanks today, Lisa. I'll give you the closing remark. People, I'm here in the AICPA New York office. People are saying, "Where's the bicycle?" Lisa, I think the big thing is you want to just.
I'll be back in my home office next time, and you'll get that bicycle back in the view.
Back. And any advice on Memorial Day weekend again, Lisa?
Take a breath, grill out, unplug.
There you go. Thanks for the time. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.